On Saturday, March 21st, something happens that should have terrified the entire world. Israel and Iran both struck nuclear-related targets inside the same 24-hour window. Natans was hit first, then Fordo was hit hours later. And just 3 days earlier, a projectile landed only 350 meters from Iran's Bushair nuclear power plant. No government has fully claimed it. No government has properly explained it. And almost nobody is asking the real question. What happens when the next strike lands a little closer? In the next few minutes, I'll show you exactly how this escalation unfolded. And by the end, you will see why this came dangerously close to becoming a radiological disaster in the Persian Gulf. Now, let's start with Natans, because this is where the nightmare became real. Iran's Atomic Energy Organization confirmed the strike early Saturday morning. The Shahid Ahmadi Roshan Enrichment Complex, about 220 kilometers southeast of Tehran, was hit again. This was not the first time. It had already been damaged earlier in the campaign. Iran's Tasnim news agency, which is tied to the Revolutionary Guard, described it as a joint American and Israeli airstrike. Reports from American outlets suggested bunker-buster munitions were used. Iran called the attack criminal. It accused the United States and Israel of violating every nuclear safety commitment they had ever made. But then came the sentence that mattered most. No leakage of radioactive material, no danger to nearby residents. Read that again carefully. That is not a victory statement. That is a containment statement. It means a heavily fortified underground nuclear site was struck hard enough that the only relief was that radiation stayed inside. The International Atomic Energy Agency said it had been notified. Director General Rafael Grossi again called for maximum restraint. Russia's foreign ministry went even further. It warned that this kind of strike carries a real risk of catastrophic regional consequences. And then the story took a strange turn. Israel's military said it was not aware of a strike on Natans. That wording is very important. It is not a denial. It is deliberate ambiguity. It leaves room for someone else to own the attack, or not own it, while Israel keeps its options open. And that matters because Natans is not just another site. It is the center of Iran's enrichment program. This is one of the most important pieces of infrastructure in the entire nuclear chain. It was hit during the last major conflict, too. It was hit again in the opening days of this campaign. Satellite imagery already showed severe damage to multiple buildings earlier in March. And this is where the stakes rise fast. Iran has enriched uranium to levels that have no civilian purpose. Western intelligence assessments have long warned that the stockpile is large enough for several weapons, if further processed. That means every strike on Natanz narrows the line between military pressure and nuclear catastrophe. And just as people were trying to understand Natanz, retaliation came. Within hours, Iranian missiles hit Deona and Arad in southern Israel. One missile directly struck a residential building. The Israeli Defense Forces confirmed it, a direct hit on a building in a populated area. Iran's state television made no attempt to hide the purpose. They described it as a response to what happened at Natanz. The IRGC framed it as retaliation, and that single move changed the meaning of the entire conflict. Because Deona is not just another town. It sits near Israel's nuclear research center in the Negev desert. For decades, that facility has been at the center of Israel's policy of nuclear ambiguity. Israel has never confirmed or denied its nuclear arsenal. But the world has long understood what Deona represents. It is widely assessed as the backbone of Israel's undeclared nuclear capability. So when a missile lands there, it is not symbolic. It is a direct message. And the civilian impact was immediate. Rescue teams reported injuries, shattered buildings, and panic across multiple sites. Casualty numbers climbed through the evening. Magen David Adom said it treated nearly 40 people across the impacted areas. A 12-year-old boy was seriously injured by shrapnel. A woman in her 30s was moderately wounded. Others were treated for broken bones, shrapnel exposure, and severe psychological distress. Paramedics described the scene as chaos. Emergency crews were deployed to at least a dozen locations. And once again, the authorities had to make a public nuclear reassurance. The Atomic Energy Commission said it had no indication that the nuclear research center itself was damaged. It also reported no abnormal radiation readings. That is the second time in one day that officials had to reassure the public that a nuclear site had not been breached. 2 countries, 2 nuclear targets, 1 day. And this is where the tension begins to spread beyond just military strikes. The IDF announced an investigation into the interception failure. That matters because Deona is one of the most defended locations in Israel. It is protected by layered air defense systems for a reason. So if a missile gets through there, even once, the message to Iran is obvious. The target is reachable. And if it is reachable once, it may be reachable again. Now hold that thought, because we need to go back 3 days. On Tuesday, March 17th, the Bushair nuclear power plant became the next flashpoint. The IAEA confirmed that a projectile struck and destroyed a structure only 350 meters from the reactor. Bushair is Iran's only operating nuclear power plant. It is a Russian-built VVER reactor. It has been connected to the electrical grid since 2011, and the material stored there is not symbolic either. Rosatom chief Alexei Likachev said there were 72 tons of fissile material on site. He also said 210 tons of spent nuclear fuel were being stored in cooling facilities. Likachev warned that a direct hit on the reactor core would cause a regional catastrophe. He said no country in the Middle East would escape radiation exposure. He also said the Americans and Israelis know the exact coordinates. That is not a casual warning. That is a signal that the next strike could be much closer than anyone wants to admit. And here's the part that makes Bushair even more unsettling. Most people assumed the projectile came from outside Iran, but trajectory analysis raised a different possibility. High-resolution satellite imagery showed the debris field fanning southward from the impact point. That pattern is consistent with an incoming projectile from the north, not from the Persian Gulf, not from a submarine launch, not from the direction many people first suspected. That opens the possibility that the projectile may have come from inside Iran itself. An accidental launch, a malfunction, a misfire. No government has claimed responsibility. The IAEA has not assigned blame. And nobody seems eager to answer the question out loud. A week earlier, satellite imagery also showed an unidentified object about 5 meters long at the same location. Nobody has explained what that object was either. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes this story so dangerous. Because Bushair is not a normal target. It sits near infrastructure that matters to millions of people across the Gulf. A serious radiation release there would not stay inside Iran. It would affect desalination plants that supply drinking water to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait. That means the consequences would not be local. They would be regional. And regional is where the next layer of this conflict begins. Rosatom had already evacuated workers and family members before the strike. Children of employees were pulled out before the war intensified. A third evacuation is now underway. Hundreds of personnel still remain on site. Construction work on additional reactor units has been suspended. Russia has also lodged a formal protest with Israel through its embassy in Tel Aviv. That matters because Moscow has made it clear that Russian lives are now part of this equation. If a Russian national is killed at Bushair, the geopolitical fallout will not stay in the Middle East. And while all this was happening, Israel was striking other sites too. The Air Force confirmed a hit inside Malik Ashtar University in Tehran. The IDF said it was a strategic research and development facility used by Iran's military industries. The site is linked to nuclear and ballistic missile development. It is also associated with sanctioned defense activity. And that connection leads to SPND, the Organization of Defensive Innovation and Research. And SPND is widely viewed as the successor to Iran's historical nuclear weapons program. Another SPND-linked facility near the Mojde complex was also hit earlier in the campaign. Satellite imagery confirmed that a laboratory building there had only recently been completed. It had never been visited by IAEA inspectors. That detail is important. A brand new facility, no international oversight, destroyed before inspectors could even enter. And while the strikes kept coming, the war was expanding in scale. IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Ayel Zamir said the campaign is about halfway through. He described the Iranian regime as battered and confused. He said it was operating without significant defensive capability. And that came after more than 8,000 military targets were reportedly struck across Iran. The number of naval vessels hit was also significant. A CNN investigation found that many underground bases and tunnel entrances had already been bombed. It also found signs of Iranian crews digging out buried munitions within 48 hours of strikes. In other words, neither side is breaking. The conflict is still grinding forward, and that is exactly why every new strike matters. Zamir then pointed to something even bigger: Iran's missile launch against Diego Garcia. On Friday, 2 intermediate-range ballistic missiles were fired at the joint U.S.-British base in the Indian Ocean. That base is roughly 3,800 kilometers from Iranian territory. Neither missile hit the base. One failed in flight. The other was intercepted, although details remain unclear. But Zamir's point was not just about Diego Garcia. His point was about range. Those missiles were not meant only for Israel. Their reach extends far beyond the Middle East. That means capitals in Europe are no longer outside the conversation. Berlin, Paris, and Rome suddenly sit inside the threat horizon, and that directly contradicts what Iran's foreign minister said only weeks earlier. Abbas Araghchi had claimed Iran was not developing long-range missiles. He said the range had been limited to under 2,000 kilometers. The Diego Garcia launch shattered that claim overnight. Iran's own media later boasted that the range was greater than the enemy expected. So the map has changed. The threat has widened. And the world is now looking at a conflict that is no longer just regional. This is where the escalation ladder becomes impossible to ignore. It started with covert tension around nuclear sites, then it moved into direct attacks on enrichment facilities. Then it became retaliation against nuclear-adjacent towns, and now it is reaching toward global economic consequences. Because when a war threatens nuclear infrastructure in the Gulf, oil markets do not stay calm. Shipping routes do not stay calm. Water infrastructure does not stay calm. And investor confidence does not stay calm either. On the same day, Iran fired multiple ballistic missile salvos at Israel. Fragments of one missile struck a kindergarten in Rishon LeZion. The damage was severe. The mayor stood in front of the destroyed building and said it was in total ruins. He added that if children had been there on a weekday, the outcome would have been unthinkable. The education minister canceled Passover camps across 18 municipalities. The defense minister called the attack a war crime. And in the north, Hezbollah kept firing rockets from Lebanon. Homes were damaged in Metula and Safed. Drones crossed from Lebanese airspace. Sirens sounded across the western Galilee. By Saturday evening, missiles also struck the southern city of Arad. Emergency services declared a mass casualty event. At least 30 people were wounded. Some were seriously injured. Rescue teams reported people trapped beneath collapsed walls. Some were unconscious. Outer walls of residential buildings had been ripped away. That was the second time within hours that an Iranian ballistic missile punched through Israel's defenses and hit a populated area. And still, no one has clearly defined the conditions for ending this war. No government has offered a final threshold. No side has explained what would count as enough. And that is what makes this so dangerous. Every nuclear safety boundary that existed when this conflict began has now either been breached or come within 350 meters of being erased. The question is no longer whether someone will miscalculate. The question is whether anyone on either side has a real plan for what happens after that miscalculation. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate your support. Subscribe to Market Mindset for more updates like this. Like the video, share it, and leave your opinion in the comments so I can see what you think about where this is heading. And click the next video on the screen to stay updated.